Hello, my name is Bakaran Schultz, and I work for Ipsos, which is a global research firm. I work in a division called Creative Excellence, where we focus in on using qualitative and quantitative methods in order to help our clients get to what we call creative excellence. This is my third research firm, and I worked at three different advertising agencies, so I know a little bit about what it is that we're talking about as we continue you towards your certificate in marketing optimization and insights, specifically around informing creative development. And you are almost done with the whole course. And this is the seventh, what we're calling module. And this one is focusing you on what makes a great ad. And to start us off with one of our quotes, we have the infamous David Ogilvy once again chiming in. And one of the things that he said was no matter how good an ad is, it has to generate results. Otherwise, what's the point? What you're going to walk away from the certificate with, the ability to apply a modern centric approach to how you develop and help optimize all of the marketing activities for either the clients or the firm in which you work. You're going to be able to help identify the business goals, objectives, and strategies that are relevant to the marketing and advertising that you are developing. You're going to assess the requirements of an effective marketing and advertising plan to help develop the business goals with which you are going to measure your work. You're going to be able to develop all the actionable insights that come from mining all the consumer and marketing data, integrate the research and insights process into the development, testing, and optimizing of the messaging and creative assets. You'll also be able to evaluate the media choices, the media mix, and optimal media plans in order to make sure that you are going to drive the right plan to get to reaching all of your business goals. You're going to be able to measure the effectiveness and the efficiency of a marketing campaign, and also to be able to determine all the appropriate optimizations to make sure that it's the best that it can be. And you're going to meet a lot of people along the way. And as we think about how informing creative development fits into the overall certificate that you're working towards, we know that this course is building on the content from the foundations course and reinforcing all of the benefits that we find when we use a consumer first approach across all of the different kinds of courses in this program. What you're going to walk away from this course with is the ability to justify the role of research throughout the creative development process, which you will find you will be doing often throughout your career. You're going to be able to recommend all the research approaches to make sure that you're informing the balance between the rational and the emotional, and also performance versus brand building creative campaigns. You'll be able to design and recommend the appropriate research plan to support the creative campaign platform in which you are helping develop. You're going to be able to integrate the insights and the inputs into a very impactful creative brief in order to be able to assist in generating the campaign platform in which you will help give life. You're going to be able to recommend the appropriate research tools, things like pre-testing, A versus B, system 1 and 2, behavioral economics, based kind of research, all those kinds of things that we've been talking about, and also the appropriate frameworks. You're also going to be able to create a story-driven analysis of the research insights and recommendations for a creative campaign, while also leading all the effective conversations and briefing meetings that you're going to have across the stakeholders throughout your creative development journey, and it is a journey. What we're going to cover in this module. Specifically, we're going to look at what makes a great ad, which is all of the culmination of the things that we've been talking about throughout this is specifically you helping develop what a great ad is and having an opinion of what a great ad is, and really being able to make sure that you're able to interpret and build the insights and recommendations from all the creative asset and campaign research based on the objectives that you have to build your business. Also, you'll be able to create a short story-driven analysis and visual summary of findings and recommendations that will incite action. So, what is a great ad? It's going to be your job to specifically help to decide whether or not your team has arrived at the Holy Grail, which again is a great ad. This is everything that you've been driving for throughout your process. But it will also be important for you to objectively know, how did you get there? How are you going to define what a great ad is? And really, probably most importantly, is how are you going to help your team get there again with a sustainable construct? It's awesome to be able to say you helped develop a great ad, but unless you have the chops to be able to help your team know how to get there again with some kind of with a process that's driven on rigor and insight and things that can be repeatable, it's going to be important for you to be able to figure out how you're going to be able to bring that kind of rigor, because one great ad does not a career make. And what you're going to find is that there are a lot of opinions about what a great ad is. And you're going to hear all kinds of conversations throughout your career that will be reminiscent of those that have been happening across all of time in the industry and the onset of advertising. Ultimately, your assessment and your opinion are going to really have to be based on objectivity and simplicity, because to have a very complicated construct of what great advertising is one that is not going to help people very often. The easier it is for people to understand what a great ad is, the easier it is for you to be able to lead them to that spot once again. It's also not going to be enough for you to be able to say, I'm going to know it when I see it. You really need to be able to think about all the things that are going into the assessment, and the kind of rigor that you'll bring to the situation is really important, because otherwise, you're going to sound or find yourself very much trapped in a vortex of opinion. So, no matter how you decide in your career with the construct or the different kinds of tools to assess and qualify an ad, there are just going to be certain undeniable truths that you will want to make sure that you're living up to. Because while creativity itself doesn't necessarily really have a lot of rules, great ads absolutely must adhere to some. And why is that? Well, because at the end of the day, we're in the business of building and generating sales. Nobody got into advertising in order to just make great advertising for storytelling's sake. It is absolutely driving for great bottom lines and sales and revenue. So let's talk about the things that you're going to have to adhere to with all of the rules of great advertising. And the first one is absolutely you must capture consumer attention. And in a lot of different research methodologies, you're going to find that this is called breakthrough, which is really a simple way of saying you must break through the clutter in order to capture attention. The next rule that you will absolutely find yourself adhering to is that the advertisement must very clearly connect to the brand. It cannot leave people questioning, who was that ad for? And this is what we will often hear research professionals call branding. The third rule you will find yourself adhering to is you must convey a clear message. If it's not clear, if it leaves people confused, it doesn't matter how much you captured the consumer's attention, and it doesn't matter at all how clearly you branded it, because if you confuse people, you will not be helping with what is often called message takeaway, which is just the message that a person will take away when they spend time with an advertisement, if it is clear to them what it is saying. The final rule is we must stimulate a desired response. Absolutely. If you are just giving people something pretty to look at, it doesn't matter how much it captured their attention, connected it to a brand, conveyed a message. If it doesn't incite some kind of response that we want to for our brand team, then it hasn't done its job. And this is what is often called persuasion. So again, the ad must capture attention, connect it back to the brand, convey a clear message, and stimulate a desired response. Let's start talking first about what it is to capture the consumer's attention and to break through the clutter. Well, people are really kind of always on and being stimulated in today's environment and today's really frenetic lifestyle. We know that they're not always receiving. It's really our job as marketers to break through that clutter and to stop people dead in their tracks, and to be captivated for a moment in time by what it is that we want them to store away in their memory about our brand. We know that to break through is going to be really difficult, because first, we know that about 66% of people will pay or skip ads that are coming at them. And I'm sorry, will pay to avoid the ads that are coming at them. So 66% are paying to skip or to pay to avoid those ads. We know that 57% of people are using technology to block ads. And we also know that a lot of people, almost half, will not watch ads or will do something else in order to avoid spending time with an advertisement. Again, it is very true that it's going to be our job to break through the clutter, and we know that people are absolutely busier than they ever have been. They have way more to engage with, and they're almost consistently multitasking, even though there is evidence to say there is no such thing as multitasking. It is just switch tasking. And when you are switch tasking, there is no ability to really retain a crystal clear memory of what you've done. And it is more crazy out there than ever. And we know that about 100 ads a day, or 6 an hour, or almost one every 10 minutes is what people are being exposed to as just one of the things that is vying for their attention. That is not to even take into account all of the other things that you're going to have to compete with your message. We also know that in order to capture a viewer's attention, there are many different ways to do this, and we could spend an entire lifetime and an entire career talking about the human attention span, human memory, and how to get through to it. And there's always going to be more ways to count than you could possibly imagine on how to capture people's attention. But we do know that there are a few that we've identified that you can start to fall back on as different kinds of strategies in order to do this. The first is to be a really good storyteller and to make sure that you're studying the craft of storytelling. Human beings are just very naturally drawn to story arcs, to beginnings, middles, and ends, and the desire to be able to find out what happens at the end of a story. It's really how we've communicated as communicating creatures since the beginning of time, and we also told stories across our tribes before we even had language. This was how we conveyed information to help people live their lives and to, after all, avoid the woolly mammoths that people were going to be in combat with. The second thing is new news. Telling people something that they didn't know is a great way to be able to captivate somebody and to capture attention. We know that zigging when others might zag, taking sort of the path less traveled, and making sure that we really avoid those advertising tropes of the product category that you're in are going to be very important. And not taking that path that is well traveled is going to help you really stand out. If you are different, this is definitely a way that you are going to be able to start to differentiate your brand and your product. We know that understanding things like color psychology are going to be really helpful as you are trying to differentiate and capture people's attention. We know things that just are stored away already in people's psyches, and the way that they start to filter through the world of communication. We know, for example, that red communicates urgency to human beings. Blue really promotes a sense of security and trust, and so on and so forth. There are associations that people already have with colors, and knowing what those things are will help you very much to capture attention. If you want to use the rule of thirds and dividing a canvas into equal rectangles, placing critical visual elements across all of the different cross points which the human eye is drawn to are going to be very important. You can start to think about the way that people look at magazines or books. We start to see that people will filter attention across a page from left to right, and then down the page and across the page again from left to right. So if you start to think about how to communicate in rules of thirds in print, and looking at how you communicate in print versus moving film is also going to be very important as you develop your own craft as a researcher. Okay, so let's also think about culture and what it is that we can understand about people and the cultural elements to which they've already been accustomed to understand certain different kinds of communication, and making sure that we understand the culture in which your audience was raised. Understanding the emotional roller coaster people really want to be taken on a little bit of a journey in order to be able to understand what's the tension that you're creating that wants to be solved for. So if we think about the emotional roller coaster that you're taking your audience on, it's important to understand, where do we want people to lean in and get excited and bring energy, and bringing them down a little bit again, so that we can take them on that roller coaster so that it's an experience and keeps them engaged. Let's also think about avoiding the unexpected and making sure that you're surprising people a little bit with the experience in which they are engaged, and keeping them captivated is going to be an important tactic throughout your communication as well. So let's avoid the truly expected, because if it's truly expected, people are probably going to tune out feeling like, been there, done that. The next thing is celebrities. And celebrities, we could also have a very long conversation about, because beloved celebrities are not only going to be able to capture attention, but they will also be able to help bring and transfer some of their own equity, or some of the things that people think about their celebrity, to your product and to your brand. But you must think about everything that the celebrity brings: good, bad, wonderful, ugly. What happens if the celebrity is involved in something while they're involved in your campaign? This could also transfer to the campaign's ability to be effective, and it could potentially negatively take away from the power of the campaign that you worked so hard to develop. Um, when you think about the kinds of campaigns that you've probably been well exposed to, if you think about what Kaepernick had to do with Nike, there were many people who said Nike should never have attached their brand to all of the things that he did in order to make sure that he stood for what he was trying to stand for as a human being and as a player. At the end of the day, Nike benefited, but they really invested time and composure and consistency in making sure that they stood for standing by him throughout that campaign. Also, we want to think about things like unexpected humor and the things that are tried and true methods for getting attention in both an unexpected way, and also the ability to make sure that if you do leverage some kind of expected humor, let's make sure that it's within a story that can be unique to your brand and not used over and over again by another. We should also think about the psychology of sharing. So why do people share a piece of content, and what are they getting out of sharing? What is that cultural currency and that social currency in which they are developing as they share the content? So now that we've talked about different kinds of content and what you need to think about as you're working with people who will not only bring methodologies to help us understand how to capture attention, what we also know is that there will be a lot of different areas that you can study as far as executional elements, and the way that different storytellers and different producers and directors and creative teams will bring their talent. And there will be a debate about some of the things that should be done. And I would say, start to pay attention to the fact that there's going to be lots of data to tell you that sometimes there are just myths that will start to permeate the culture and the debates that people will have about whether or not you should do this or should do that. And the truth of the matter is, as you start to really focus on these executional elements, you will start to see things like, for example, people will debate as to whether or not you should have a certain number of scenes, especially when you're thinking about a TV commercial or a piece of moving film, wherever you're airing it. And there will be lots of conversation about whether or not there's a number of scenes that sort of hits that sweet spot of really getting people's attention. And what we can start to look at as researchers is to understand that there's lots of data out there that will help debunk these myths. So for example, there was a woman named Laura Lawler who started to look at all the different kinds of quick cuts and the kinds of numbers of scenes and commercials in order to see if there's truth to that. Is there something that helps capture or lose attention? And in the first round of testing, she looked at TV commercials that had about half the number of scenes as the parent or the other ad that she was comparing it to. So one commercial had 34 scenes in it, and the other had half at 17. And they both captured about the same amount of attention. When she looked at another set of commercials that were very similar in content with each other, but one had 21 and one had 10, we can also see that the measured attention was about the same across both of those. And then we can see in her last test that when she looked at one that had 31 scenes and the second one had not quite half, but about 2/3, we can see that the measured attention, the number or the percentage of people that said that they paid attention to it is really no different. What I can also tell you is that when I look at the middle set of results, what I can see between the difference between 21 and 10 scenes, I start to notice that 21 and 10 compared to 34, we start to see that there are more people saying that they paid attention to a commercial that had fewer scenes than the others. So I would say make sure that you're debunking the myths about executional, tried and true uh, ways to capture attention. What you want to do is understand where's the nuance and really get into what is it exactly that people are carrying around as far as mythology versus versus things that actually will show up in the data. What we can also see is that people will talk about, well, do characters need to be likable? Do they need to be relatable? And do they need to actually be truly human in order to capture attention? And what we can see when we look at different kinds of illustrations versus real people is that there does start to be a certain level of relatableness to the kinds of people that are actually very human and will be much easier for people to put themselves in the role of relating to that person because they are a human being and they are not a cartoon character. So there are different ways that we can think about this, but it is very true that likable, relatable, and feeling natural will absolutely capture more attention. This is not to say that you should only have these characters in a story. It just depends on who are the characters that you want to cast as the protagonist? Who are the people that you want to represent sort of the hero nature of your brand and or your product, and to make sure that the people who are really meant to represent those that are interacting with your brand are those that are the most likable and relatable. It will make it much easier for people to put themselves in the position of thinking about being that person. What I will also say is that over the course of uh, creativity, you will start to see things like cartoon characters who are really used to represent or to be iconic and representative of the brand. As long as those characters, and you may or may not remember a set of characters called Kelvin and Hobbes, you will start to recognize that if you have a real relatableness, a real sense of humanity about your characters, you will also recognize that you can use them to represent as long as you have consistency and making sure that as the hero of the ad, whatever part of life that they're meant to represent, you want to make sure that they are going to be your most relatable and likable characters. Let's talk about clearly connecting to the brand. And this is what we usually hear in research as what is branding. So again, this is one of the core pillars of what we want to make sure is coming through in your work. So when we think about clearly connecting to the brand, even if an ad really does break through and get attention, unless the brand being advertised ultimately is remembered or really internalized, the ad really is unlikely to perform well. Weak branding is the main reason, actually, in research that we see as why ads are failing in market the most often. So, if you have an ad that is capturing attention, you also need to make sure that it is attaching itself to the brand. What we can see from a lot of the research that we have at Ipsos, and I would say that this is very true across other companies as well, 50% of the ads that really do fail in market, it's due to the fact that they have weak branding. Less than 50% of ads actually have a strong performing ad in favor of the brand. So somebody will store it away as a memory for another brand often, or a category, or just as a piece of entertainment. So the other 50% of reasons why ads fail in market is because they can be irrelevant and not differentiating. They can be dull or boring, or it can actually just be that it's been on air for so long that it's really starting to get tired and worn out. So The other thing that you want to start to think about is setting yourself up for success and making sure that you really have the brand very well integrated into the story of the ad. And this is something that you will also hear a lot of people debate. There's going to be a lot of nuance in how mature your brand is, how familiar your audience is with it. Coca-Cola, it's much easier to show the brand at the end of the ad and to capture all of that emotion and all of the wonderful memories that you're trying to build. But if you are launching a brand new soda, putting your ad or putting your brand at the end of the ad is a much riskier technique. How are you going to make sure that your ad is clearly connected to the brand? Let's talk about a few ways that you can do that. The first is to make sure that it's integrated into the storyline. It's not just magically appearing at the very end. You want to make sure that it has a role. Think of it as a character. You want to make sure that is prominently or placed as a character in the ad, and it's not just about putting the brand somewhere in the ad. You want to make sure that it's totally integrated. You want to make sure that it's impossible or almost impossible for somebody to tell the story of the ad without saying, and then Coke came in and did this. You want to make sure, again, that it is hard for a human being to play back that memory without including the actual brand. So let's now take a look at one of the ads that actually did this very well. And before you watch the commercial, stop yourself and think along the way whether or not you feel like Hyundai, it really has a role within this ad, or is it just merely a brand that shows up? Think about how it's actually integrated, or if you don't agree that it is.
Well, I was thinking maybe we could go to Grandma's house after this, you know?
It's a puppy! Can we keep him, please?
No. Oh, you got a 6, okay. Oh, no. Go, let's do it. All right. Hi. Oh, hey, what you got there? All right, go get it. Come on. Yeah, good boy. Who's your buddy? I'm your buddy. Ready? Go.
Dibs, I got it first. No, you.
When it comes to lasting relationships, we're thinking of every mile. The new Hyundai Tucson. It's your journey. Be sure to click to subscribe. Maybe it's more adorable dog content. Maybe it's not more adorable dog content. There's only one way to find out.
Okay. The other thing that we can see is that when you do produce new ads, and there's a piece of research that is in your reading that was written by young Dalian Turpin, and this is about the way that people actually start to store away memories about being connected to the brand. One of the things that you want to think about is whether or not the idea really fits your brand. So if you are thinking about whether or not an execution is actually going to represent your brand in a way that people will automatically be able to connect back to the brand, at least at some level, we want to be able to understand that taking the ideas, those images, those sounds, the tone of voice of the ad, and the feel of the ad is the way that you'll find yourself talking about it a lot. The emotions that are created by a new ad really need to work to be able to link back to the existing network of brand associations that people already have. So if, or in this piece of research, what you can see is that all of the associations that the researchers found in the consumer's minds are really connected to the memories from the past brand experiences. And that is how the idea of the brand is actually being formed in the mind. So when we talk about who owns the brand, the consumer, the human being, is really who owns your brand. It's all of those rich associations they've built up over the years about your brand. So you really need to think about, is this in service to the brand or is it just in service to creativity? Again, we need to make sure that we're reinforcing what we already know is in somebody's memory bank. But what we also know is that we need to be able to give them something new to think about, but it has to sort of fit in that much broader puzzle that is starting to really be that very rich, nuanced brand that you will be wanting to work towards in your career. What we can see is that if you look at how the researchers brought together all of the different images and what it meant to actually thinking about Oreo, we can see at the top of the food chain of all of these associations is that iconic twisting and turning of the Oreo cookie. Also just that those big kind of marshmallowy puffed Oreo logo, and all of the different images of people as they're interacting with Oreo. You can start to think about in your own mind, what are those things that you might have grown up with thinking about Oreo? And you want to make sure that if you put those new images up next to all of the major imagery that you've used throughout your career to build a brand, that it wants to feel like it's fitting in, but also making sure that it gives somebody a little bit new information. So when you start to think about, if you're looking at the age of a tree, if you look inside and you cut a section of it, you can start to see that the rings show how old that tree is, and that there are always new rings being added onto it. So you want to make sure that you feel like this makes enough sense to be able to put it out there and to attach. Otherwise, it's going to fight with how somebody already thinks about a brand and likely not be stored away in memory. One of the things that Kantar has talked to people about through all of the time and the methodology that they used for Link is that emotion is another really powerful tool in storytelling. Very nice quote, emotion is a super glue that makes memory stick. Well, if you can remember from module 2, you can see that emotion really does help cement a brand into consumers' memory. Here's an ad that will start to help us think about how emotion can actually be used as a very powerful storytelling technique.
Grammarly Go is the only generative AI product that you need. It's easy to use in the places you write.
Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Oh, shall I stay? Would it be a sin? Oh, if I can't help falling in love with you. Oh, like a river flows surely to the sea, darling, so it goes. Some things are meant to be. Won't take my hand, take my whole life too, for I can't help falling in love with you. Oh, for I can't help falling in love.
Give extra, get extra.
With you.
So whether you like the commercial or not, you can see how the narrative, it is impossible to not see how some people's heartstrings would be pulled, but also if you think about the way that Extra shows up in that story, it is a core character, and it is almost impossible to think about whether or not you would tell that story back with Extra as a main character, especially when the boyfriend, now fiance, uses the gum papers, the gum wrappers, in order to create the art and play back the story of their life. Okay, so thinking about emotion a little bit more, let's look at a couple of data points. So when we think about, Kantar Miller Brown, their methodology is called Link. And when we think about whether or not the myth about whether the frequency of ads or the frequency of how the brand shows up in a certain length of ad, and this happens to show 30-second ads, we want to think about, well, is the frequency of an ad showing up? Is that how we get the brand to be sticky in people's memories of those commercials? And what we can see across all of the studies where we see all of the United States commercials that they tested, whether or not the brand was continuously in the ad, certain parts, at the end only, or sometimes not even shown. Our branding score hovers at about the same amount of branding. So we definitely can see that not shown and at the end only is a little bit riskier. We can see that continuously we get a little bit more of a branding impact. However, they're all at about average. So really it's about whether or not it's a very well told story with a very purposeful way in order to cement the story along with the brand. When we look at whether or not in the top box of branding in the Link methodology, the length of time before the first appearance of the brand, and there's a rule that you'll start to hear, people will say early and often. I would say do not buy into that mythology at all. And instead, you really want to think about where is the relationship with your viewer, with your human being that you want to talk to, in comparison with the maturity of your brand and how familiar they are. What we can see is that we do start to find that top box branding scores are a little bit more rare as you wait for the commercial to unveil itself completely. So some companies will use sort of the role as being the producer of the ad and making sure that you can say it was brought to you by them because they're at the very end, and that's going to be a little bit riskier. You will less frequently find yourself in the top box or the most successful response of whether or not somebody remembered it was for your brand if it is at the very end, because most brands are not at the stage where they can really tell a full story and come in at the very end and take credit for the entire memory. So now let's talk about the third pillar, which is conveying a clear message. And this is something that a lot of people will call message takeaway. So when we think about how to convey the clear message, we need to make sure that we are telling a message that is very relevant, has some information value, and also is differentiating from your competition. Why? Well, because ads that are informative and really do differentiate the brand and are relevant will build on both the behavior and the relationship change potential. Your brand really needs to make sure that it proves to people that it understands their desires and it can satisfy them in a very distinctive way. So now I'm going to show you some data from Ipsos. And there was a meta-analysis done of many thousands of ads across the course of 5 years. And what we found at Ipsos is that when something is informative, we will see a change in what we call the behavior index, or the change in the behavior change index, and also the relationship change, which means ads that were informative, those that are above norm and those that are below norm, we can see that there's a much greater change in behavior change index, where we have people saying that it is very informative versus not at all. We can also see that the relationship change is those that perform above norm or below norm. There's a huge spread there as well. So 44 and 47 points difference. When we start to look at the behavior and the relationship change when it is about making the brand seem different from others, we can see there's a huge amount of difference between those brands where people thought that they were very differentiating, and we can see 44-point difference in those that helped change what people said they wanted to do with a brand before and after the ad, and also those where people said that they felt that they were closer to the brand after seeing the ad. So again, where people will say that they agree that this ad made the brand seem very different from others, there's a huge percentage of improvement in those that are different according to people who viewed the ad. Now, when we look at what people say, this ad seems like it was for people like me, the amount of relevance. So when we think about how people said this was relevant to them, behavior and relationship, again, those that performed above norm for being deemed relevant by the viewer, both in behavior and relationship change, huge point spread between those two. So again, this is not that there are only very specific ways to do this. It's that you need to make sure that you do have information, something that's helping you seem different and stand out from the others, and also very relevant. And somebody would say, that seems like they actually knew me and thought of me when they were making that ad. Okay, so when we think about the clarity of the message, this is incredibly critical. At Ipsos, we also did a large meta-analysis of all of the ads that we had pre-tested. And what we found is that a lack of clarity in an ad can dilute the rest of the ad. It can undo all of the things that you've tried to do. So when you think about the last ad that you might have seen that just left you thinking, what was that for? You're not storing away anything, and you're not walking away with much of a feeling other than you've been confused. So when we just look at it, what an example of an ad looks like, that is confusing, I'm looking at this ad thinking that this is a mortgage ad, but it's about how to play dominoes. Most likely that's the furthest that I've actually gotten. I can't see that what truly this ad is about is the fact that they want you to find getting a mortgage from First Bank so easy to comprehend that you can just go and spend more time playing things like dominoes. The payoff of this ad is worry less about your mortgage and more about your free time. Probably nobody's going to spend time with that ad to get to that point. Again, clarity of message, incredibly important. Everything else can be undone if you don't have a clear message. Being single-minded is another way that we can think about this. Kantar also did analysis of their database and figured out that when someone or an ad is trying to communicate too much, this is going to probably negatively impact a viewer's ability to really recall the ad's message. And what they found is that when you look at ads that have 1, 2, or 3 messages, what you start to see is that each of those messages is competing with each other and definitely having people or allowing people to recall less of a message. So one message, people said that they registered that message, but 42% said that it was easy for them to understand it. 2 messages, you can see attention is starting to be split. The ability to recall 3 messages is at 15, 7, and 8%. So the more messages, the harder it is for people to cement the memory of each of those messages. And I would definitely say, keep it simple. Try to make sure that your team is as focused on one message as possible. Okay, so as we're thinking about all these techniques, these are just techniques and they are not a formula. Do not let anyone convince you that creative is about being formulaic. The minute that you try to be formulaic with your creative is the minute that you've undone the power of creativity. So let's think about whether or not there are things about what you've thought about creative in this entire course, whether or not there are formulas and whether there are things that you think that people should actually adhere to other than the core pillars. Let's look at a few ads or 2 ads that actually were tested by Kantar Miller Brown that performed really well and also supposedly had very good in-market results. And I'm now going to show you 2 specific ads.
He waits. That's what he does. I'll tell you what. Tick followed tock, followed tick, followed tock, followed tick. Ahab says, I don't care who you are, here's to your dream. The old sailors return to the bar. Here's to you, Ahab! And the fat drummer hit the beat with all his heart. Here's to waiting.
Okay, again, whether or not you actually like the ad, you can see that there were a lot of things about that commercial that did not adhere to any rules. This was probably back in about 1998, and the commercial, I would argue, still stands up to the test of time at least a little bit. What they did know about their brand is that the people who really had a relationship with their brand were very athletic, were super spirited, thought about the kind of the road less traveled, and wanted to think about the brand as something that really celebrated and really was sort of poetically doing justice to that kind of a relationship with that brand. And because Guinness is so and was so mature, they were able to bring the brand in at the very end. And you were able to think about the brand and also the consumption of, if you noticed, nobody's consuming and nobody's practicing consuming that product in that advertisement. This was all theater of the mind, and the brand's relationship with the audience definitely allowed them the ability to just come in at the very end and to be part of that story. So now let's watch another one. Okay, I have a few things to say about that ad, including that ridiculous ad is one of my favorites. And even though there are lots of things about it that people would say do not make for a good formula, there are lots of things about that commercial that defy all of the myths that you're going to hear. But the storytellers found themselves with a brand that had a very specific kind of relationship with the people that it was trying to appeal to. So it had the ability to absolutely introduce themselves at the end in a way that punctuated the relationship that already existed in the minds of the viewers. So that tagline at the very end, a glass and a half full of joy, I mean, it is an absolutely ridiculous commercial, and it is fabulous on every level based on the brand's understanding of the relationship and the memory rings that it could attach itself to in order to flesh out an already mature relationship and deliver on the brand's promise. Okay. So stimulating a desired response. Again, very important as a core pillar for us to be able to think about the final job that our ad has to do. When we think about all the different kinds of response that we want to be able to stimulate, it could be many things. It could be generating brand awareness, building brand associations, driving a trial or a purchase, reminding people that you exist, getting people, the existing viewers and customers to buy for one more additional occasion, drive traffic to a website, get people to vote, drive people to donate to a charity. At the end of the day, all advertising has some intended response, and we need to make sure that when we fall or we try to create great advertising, we need to think about, will people leave this experience delivering upon what we intend for them to do? So make sure that you are trying to do the right job before you actually decide what it is that you are going to drive as an intention. One of the ways that we can think about really making sure that we get to our desired response is making sure that we think about how could we possibly build a campaign that is built upon both rational and emotional appeals. What we do know, and this is going to be data that comes from Kantar, we do know that those that appeal to people's rational sides and also their emotional side is going to drive stronger responses. So what Kantar did was look at ads that had an impact on sales effect. And what they found was that ads that both had a rational strategy and an emotional strategy at the same time. So the blue is where both rational and emotional triggers were being pulled. We can see that across all brands, small brands, and established brands, those that had both rational and emotional triggers did better in order to lift market share. So when you think about the Cadbury and you also think about Guinness, those were two ads that absolutely delivered on creativity, but also had the kind of brand message where they could just make sure that they were delivering upon something that people already knew about, but also had the ability to appeal to them both emotionally and with just a touch of rational information. Now I'm going to play an ad that we tested at Ipsos that I believe fires on all pistons. And it will really, I think, bring everything that we've talked about as far as message and understanding your brand and making sure that there's some information and appealing rationally and emotionally. There's also some film techniques in this ad. When you're watching it, think about how there's no dialogue. It's all told through the story of the music. And we didn't even touch on how powerful music can be. Music is one of the strongest triggers of human memory, just like scent. So I would ask you to think about how it appeals to you on all levels by telling a story without actually telling it to you.
I am what I am. I don't want praise. I don't want pity. I bang my own drum. Some think it's noise. I think it's pretty and so what if I love each sparkle and each bangle? Why not try to see things from a different angle? Your life is a sham till you can shout out, I am what I am.
I think one of the things about that commercial that is brilliant is the way that they close out, see the world differently. And if you go back and look at the annals of all of the advertising that Virgin has done over the course of time, it is keeping within a certain brand tone and the love of being able to explore the world for personal growth. And the result can be helping you to see the world differently. So that is it for our 7th module, what makes a great ad. And you are done. And I hope that you enjoyed just a little bit of it, and hopefully you will have come full circle with just a few things to think about and some rigor to bring to the process as you consider how to help people understand what is a great ad, how do you identify it, how do you identify it, how do you help teams get there more often. And that is that. Thank you.